Okay, welcome to episode 3 of Can You Hear It, where we do fun exercises and listening examples, all to help us better master Logic Pro. Today, we're going to be focusing on equalization. I've got one of my tracks pulled up, and I've taken one of the instruments, duplicated it so we have 3 of them, and put different EQs on each of them. I want to see if when we listen to them, if you're able to hear the differences. I've tried to match some of the settings. But before we jump into this, make sure that if you like this kind of content that you're hitting that subscribe and notification bell. We often are doing these streams at the last second, and to give you the best chance of being on them live, that notification bell is your best friend. Of course, if you want more content, we do bonus streams for members of the channel. We've got a small but really awesome group of members and something we'd like to grow. And last but not least, if you're really looking for more learning, then one-on-one Zoom trainings available. All of those links are in the description. So today, as I said, I've got 3 different tracks. And it's the piano part of this section. I'll play it for you right now. I'm going to play just one of the pianos engaged, and then I'm going to be listening to the other 2. And the goal of this is to really focus in. That's why you're not seeing this on the screen. I'm keeping this a more generic background for the minute on purpose, because I want you to be forced to use your ears. So here's the section of the song we're doing. Here I am, trying hard to understand why we never met before. Imagine what we had in store. Here you are, half a world away from me, thinking of the things to say, try to change our yesterdays. So this is a song in progress, meaning it's not done all the way. There are still a few things that I want to tweak on it, but I think it's getting closer. I'm actually getting really close to finishing. There's a few vocal things I'm still working on, a few other of the balance and mix, but I think it's getting close. So now I'm trying to make sure that some of these instruments fit exactly how I want them to, that they're not adding to overall mud of the mix. And so EQ is one of those tools that we use. Here's the piano part, at least the first little bit, in its current state. And I'll turn off the EQ just for a second. So this is that same thing without the equalization. So the EQ isn't doing a ton. It's relatively subtle. And yet, we have a lot of different equalization options. Okay, so what I want to do is actually solo all 3 of these out. And I'm going to cut them just a little bit. So the first section you'll hear is going to be the first EQ. Like the first, I'll tell you exactly how many bars in just a moment. Then you're going to hear it go to the second piano track with EQ, and then it'll go to the third one. And I'm going to raise my hand every time, well, I'll say something, every time we get to the next section. So EQ1, EQ2, and EQ3, and I will cue when we're switching. Number 2. Oh, actually, hold on one second. There we go. We were hearing 2 and 1 at the same time. Here, transition to number 2. Number 2. Number 3. Okay, so how do we know which EQ to use? That's the question that we're really asking ourselves today. Not just what we do with the EQ when we get it, but how do we know which one we're going to reach for off the shelf? I want you to listen again to those 3 excerpts, the first and the second and the third, each with a different equalization, which have very similar settings. They're different EQs, and so they can't be exact, but I want you to listen to each one, and this time, just listen to the high frequencies, any ambience that is around that sound. How does it sound in the higher frequencies? Listen close. On the next pass, I want you to listen to the low frequencies, just the low part, and see how anything that's down there is sounding with each of these 3. So here's the first one. Number 2. Number 3. Okay, hopefully by now you're hearing quite a bit of difference between each of these. They're, at first glance, relatively similar. I mean, they sound like the same piano, just processed a little bit differently. But let's go through exactly what's happening with each of them and talk about some of these different effects. So let me switch over. Here we are now with Logic behind me. The first one is the channel EQ. And you can see there's a little boost around 6,200 cycles, and then a dip around 400, and well, exactly at 406 hertz. And so those are the 2 areas that this was originally being pushed at. I believe in many ways when I first picked this patch that this was the default that came with it. So we're starting with that. And so I mimicked that with these other 2 EQs. But this is the channel EQ, just the default one. Another time, I actually do want to listen to channel EQ versus the other, the phase EQ. Let me show you what that one is right here, the linear phase EQ. It's similar interface, but we're going to talk about that one in a minute. So this is the first one, the channel EQ. And let me push play on it. Okay, so that's that one. The next one is one of the vintage EQs, the console. This is the one that's like the Neve, traditional Neve console. And let's see, let's play this one. So this one we couldn't do exactly like the settings of the previous one. You can see it's much simpler, less overall bands. We have this low cut, and then we have a shelf and another shelf, and then one adjustable parametric band in the middle. And so we were matching the cut at 400 here, and then instead of being able to boost in a specific range, we were just boosting everything. And so, of course, the high range is going to be a little bit different. The low range is actually very similar because we're doing very little with it, but there is a slight difference to it. The third one, we grabbed this, which is the API model. And again, we're a little bit limited. So you can see the form factor of each of these equalizers is a little different. I can't adjust the actual location of the band. So if we're pulling down at 400, instead of doing the full amount at 500 or 250, it's like we're doing partial amounts at each of these to do kind of the same amount. And then the similar thing, we couldn't boost at the exact same place at 6K, so we're doing a little bit at 4K and 8K, although those look like a little bit higher. I think we should probably come down. This is the one that had the most high frequency change, and not in a really great way. Although we should note a few things we'll talk about in a minute. So let's do this and listen to this one after I made those couple changes. And I pulled them down just a hair, and it sounds a lot more similar to the other ones. So we have those three different options. And which ones do we really want? The nice thing about, for instance, these vintage EQs, the collection, is that we have a lot of flexibility with them. So part of me thinks, you know what, this is kind of like working on a console with an API graphic EQ, and that's a familiar language for me, so I could do it. But the character of this is part of what I like, sending something through an API, and we get that over here with the output model. And in this case, we can actually come through and do silky, punchy, or smooth, and those tie into each of the three. And so we can choose which one we want and then adjust how much we want. And so I could use the form factor of the API and the output of the Pultec or the Neve. And so I've got those options there. In some ways, I really like, for instance, the Pultec, right? I like the sound of a real Pultec. I think that they're great for some things like, cymbals and other things that have complex frequencies, much like a piano. So let's switch this to silky for a second and go ahead to that. And I think there's a really subtle change, but I think it's there. And sometimes with the complexity of something like a piano, it makes a little bit of sense. The reason why pianos are complex, not only are they like a bunch of strings, right? And they're attached to a large piece of metal, so it's resonating that and the box and every other piece of that. So it's complex by design, but the tonal structure of a piano is complex because the piano is one of the greatest compromised instruments that was ever made. It's not like a voice or a violin or even a trombone that you can adjust the pitch as you go. So no matter what part of a chord structure you're in, you can adjust to be perfectly in tune. A piano can only really be fully in tune if it's tuned to one key. We've figured this out back in the days of Baroque music. With Bach and the well-tempered clavier, the tuning system It's one of the great compromises because in order to have a piano or an instrument like that that plays in every key, it's slightly, I don't know if out of tune, it's tuned differently so that it's in tune as much as it can be across all of the different keys. It's a simplification, but it's true. So we end up with these thirds and fifths and sevenths that don't quite fit exactly as they would in a natural intonation system. And so we get these overtones that sound very piano-like now. We're used to it after all these hundreds of years, but they're never quite perfectly lining up with each other. And so we end up with these harmonics that are floating out of tune all the time. And we want to grab a tool sometimes that really doesn't get in the way too much or add additional either harmonic distortion or just general emphasis on things which aren't pleasant. So the next thing we can do with these two tools, or these three, the vintage, and one version of the channel EQ, is switch it to linear phase. Now, I'm 90% sure I'm going to butcher an explanation of this, except what we're doing, simply put, with an equalizer, a traditional hardware electronic-based equalizer, is using phase relationships to do the removal and subsequent boosting with different circuitry of the signal. So there's a phase relationship. And anytime you have a phase relationship, it means that we're, adjusting time-based things in order to boost and cancel out sounds. So we end up with these phasing artifacts. Now, digital technology allows us to boost and cut without relying on those phase-based relationships. And so we get a different sounding equalizer. Now, granted, you're going to have other still digital type of artifacting. It's not like it's a perfect thing that boosts and cuts, but we're able to have a much different sound. Now, I love using linear EQs in mastering, unless you need some character. I love using linear phase on things like cymbals and pianos, and sometimes complex synthesizer things that maybe already have filters involved, so we're not doubling up filters. And so it's nice. We can actually switch the phase of these vintage EQs to be linear. So let's do that for a second and listen. So I just turn them both back to the original punchy and natural phase. And again, I'm listening to the higher harmonics and other resonances in the piano. Let's switch this back to silky and linear. One nice thing about the original channel EQ, if we go back to this one for a second, is that if we're using this channel EQ, like it's not a linear phase EQ, but because they share pretty much everything except for that processing, they really should just add a button that switches. But you can come out here to the linear phase EQ and load it up, and it maintains all of your curves and settings. Okay, let me start this section over and we'll listen to all three of them now in context. Here I am, trying Now that part is designed to be a layer that's not overly in your face no matter what. Do any of those three fit better? Do any of them cut through better? That's the question that I'm asking myself. Do I want the piano to be louder? Do I need to add some like a high pass filter to get rid of some of the low frequencies because it's already everywhere else? The more low frequency content in something like a piano in a mix like this where there's a number of things happening, the harder it is to turn it up without just making it muddier. So let's actually do that with one of these. So I'm just going to put a high pass filter and we're going to creep it up a little bit here. Let's go back to the beginning. Okay, in the context of the mix, I can still hear some differences. It's getting harder to hear the differences, partially because we have different things happening in the mix at the same time. You know, the bass is coming in. There's other elements that are, maybe overshadowing a little bit. But these three settings are all very similar in many ways. And I think we're getting the same result. To me, that means maybe how much does it really matter which of these we grab in the context of a mix where, it's a layer? Would we use the vintage graphic EQ because it makes a difference, or the vintage console EQ? I'm inclined to say I would use more of the tool that is the most flexible, the most comprehensive, if it's doing a similar job enough to where it doesn't matter as much, then I would use the one that I can easily make changes to, which is either the channel EQ or the linear phase EQ, because it's a layer. Now, if I want something very specific from something, then something like the vintage graphic EQ may be something I reach for. And I would reach for it, say, on drums, partially because you can really push the drive of the output model and give it a characteristic sound. Or the vintage console EQ on a voice, if there's something very specific that I'm going for with a voice that I've always done with one of our Neve EQ modules, right? So you can go around the circle and figure out, but it makes the most sense to have a reason for whatever you're doing. You can't just grab one of these because, you're grabbing one. Like, have an actual thought process behind what you're doing with it. Q Coletti says a couple things, but the second thing was I think the vintage EQs make a difference more for additive EQ than subtractive. And we are doing a little bit of additive here as well, but I would agree. I would agree with that. And here's what I'm thinking. Here's my own personal thought process of equalization and the way that I teach this often when I'm teaching someone for the very first time with equalization. So this is like a medical tool, right? It's something that we surgically go in and change frequencies. Well, let me put it this way. There's two kind of general types of surgery. There's the kind that's the internal medicine, where you have to go in and fix something, pull it out, and when you're all said and done, theoretically, there's no scar or there's a very small scar, and you walk away and it's like you live your life, but something was fixed that was broken. And then there's the more cosmetic. Something has changed. Something happens and you no longer actually look like the person you were before. Could be like new nose or new teeth, or you're getting rid of some skin someplace that's saggy or whatever, right? You're doing cosmetic stuff. When you cut with an equalization, you're doing more of the internal medicine. You're trying to clean it up. You're trying to make it more clear. You're trying to get rid of some of the troubled things that are there. For those, I really, really, really like a really clean, no nonsense, get out of the way type of equalizer. And it could be something as simple as, the channel EQ, nothing fancy with any of that. When I'm doing the cosmetic surgery and I'm changing something, making it larger than life, or, adding some sort of harmonic change to the overall sound to make something bigger, more impressive, or just, add in some things that are really missing, then we're boosting EQ, but we're also, maybe using some of these really creative tools, like the vintage graphic EQ or the console. It doesn't matter, but any of those are really great for that. Now, I can boost with a linear phase EQ, and I still reach for that when it's a complex frequency spectrum. If I need to make a symbol just a little bit shimmerier, I'm not reaching for, one of these ones that adds more complexity. I'm reaching for the linear phase of something. So I can just add a little bit more of it without changing the phase relationship of the complex harmonics that happen in a crash or a ride or even a hi-hat. Those symbols can be very complex, harmonically speaking, and so I like to let that complexity stay the same as much as possible. If I'm doing this with a voice and I really want to add something to a voice or an overall drum bus, then I'm going to grab one of these and push the drive up and really let it do something to the sound. So for instance, we do have a drum. I don't know if I just have one. I think I have one down here that I'll use differently. So we have this more acoustic kit. Ooh, that was different. Ooh. Look at this bug. Oh, no, I know why it's not a bug. I've got it overridden. There we go. So if it ever plays at a place that's not your cycle region, what you need to do is make sure when you do this that you have an understanding of the play button options. So play button options underneath your navigate window. This is the hierarchy of what gets played. So right now, marquee selection was at the very top. So it was starting after the cycle start, which means I had a marquee selection someplace, and I just needed to deactivate it. Next, it will play from the cycle start. And then if I don't have either of these on, it'll play from the selected region. And if I don't have that on, but I have the play from last locate position, it'll do that. So this is the hierarchy of play, which is actually a really cool feature of Logic, that we have multiple options for that. So I have a channel EQ on here, but it's not doing anything. let's put on the graphic EQ. It's almost like putting a compressor on. Now I do have a compressor after it in the chain, which means if I boost up, it's going to trigger the compressor a little bit differently. But mostly this is the output model, which is set to the punchy drive setting. And I think I like what it does. I like using this model with drums. It speaks to me in a way that I think is really nice. Let's switch it to linear. Back. I just think there's something a little bit more pure with the cymbal sounds when it's like that, but that's not always what we want. Sometimes we want that phase relationship, the sound of equalization from 20 years ago. I mean, even now, a lot of equalizers use the phase. But I'm just saying that's the sound of the albums and the great sounding records of many of our childhoods. It's like that nostalgic thing. We don't always want linear phase to be the way to go. So really, I'd put it on both. I've got two drum patterns happening there. And let's turn off that EQ and put on another graphic EQ. I don't need all of that low stuff. Okay, do you all hear what happens when I go in and out with this graphic EQ? Most of that is because there's a delay. It's like I turn it off and all of a sudden things go out of time for a second. Most of that is because I'm in linear phase mode, which due to the linear phase needs of processing, there's quite a bit of latency that gets added. And so this isn't an EQ that you'd put on a track when you're recording live. This is all like in post type editing and mixing. Because it adds enough of a delay that it becomes an issue. So often when you want to, go back and forth with this, you almost need to hit stop, change it, and then push play again. So that way it's not messing up the timing at the same time. Okay, interesting. So the more we adjust some of those EQ things and boost a little bit, even if we like the character of it, doesn't mean it's going to fit better in the mix. And so I'm finding myself pushing up some of those frequencies, pushing up the drive on some of the vintage plugins, and then also reducing the overall volume, partially because they're filling up more of the space that I like and less of the space I don't like, but they're cutting through better. And so then I need to make sure I refit them with the rest of the mix. That's why so rarely should you be EQing things all by itself and soloed. You should be doing it in the context of the overall mix. That way, you're hearing how it's interplaying with all the other pieces. We don't want, to add a bunch of bass on one track because it sounds great on a guitar track and then realize that now it's fighting with the kick and the bass that were already there. So we're always having to juggle those back and forth, tightening it down. So we make one set of changes. We got to see how that ripples through all the other areas of the mix and then adjust the other parts of it at the same time. Okay. That was what I was hoping to do for today. I'm actually going to save this song as it is for now because I'm liking where it is. I'm hoping to get this one finished not too long from now. But as always, some of us have songs that are still hanging out and living rent free inside our heads. So hope this was helpful. Hope you enjoyed it. Check out the other videos in this series where we focus on listening more than just going through features, but developing our ears and developing those skills that are based off of not just looking, but using those things that help us hear. Okay, check back. We're doing one of these every week, so make sure you're subscribed and notified when we do this. Otherwise, hope you're having a great week, and I'll talk to you later.